name is Becky Himlin. I'm the current director of Planact. I'm just going to say a few words about what Planact is doing currently, to sort of frame that for a lot of you who haven't been involved with Planact recently. We're going to hear about the history of Planact shortly, and the Open Sector Network. And I just want to just spend one moment just talking about what we're doing now, or what we've done recently. All right, Planact at the current moment has essentially 4 kind of key program areas of emphasis. The top is just the financial sustainability and the institutional development, from which this project actually came. Community development involves social facilitation, organizational development, training, project development and management. That's with local communities and CBOs as sort of the partners in this way. We also are developing a partnership with the City of Johannesburg in 2 informal settlements on an integrated approach and community-based approach to HIV/AIDS. We're looking forward to that partnership in the next couple of years. We've just engaged in that recently in the last several months. In the local governance capacity building program, the idea is to promote public participation, integrated development planning, and good governance, mainly through training to ward committee members, councillors, and community leaders. We're currently involved in a partnership with RTI International VNG on a DPLG and USAID. I know we've got a million acronyms there. Local Government Support Program, which is a national program that works in I think up to 20 municipalities, district municipalities mainly, throughout the country, and we're providing training and trainer support for people to build the capacity of ward committees as Planact in those areas. All right, in research and evaluation, we do case studies based on our project work, evaluations of our project work, and we also look into issues that are of concern to us and our communities. Also, we've recently joined the Good Governance Network, which is a network of NGOs that is trying to work on advocacy as well as information sharing and learning around our good governance work that many of us are engaged in. You'll also hear a little bit about that this afternoon in one of the presentations. With that, I would just like to hand it over.
I just want to say something about civil society versus NGOs. In many parts of the world today, the term civil society is erroneously used interchangeably with NGOs. I think it's important to recognize that civil society is a much broader rubric, including, of course, trade unions, social movements, community-based groups, faith-based institutions, and so on. Let me just move to 3 challenges that I want to focus on. First is the challenge of globalization and what it means for local activism. In the early 1980s, there was a slogan that said, think globally, act locally. What was behind that slogan was, irrespective of the area of human endeavor that you were engaged in at the local or national level, you needed to better understand how global processes, global institutions, global discourse has an impact on what you can or cannot achieve at the local or national level. So one of the challenges today for activism and for struggle is, how do we find the balance between what do we struggle for at the local and national level, and how much of energies do we actually put at the global level? Because one of the contradictions of globalization today is that even though global institutions such as the United Nations, World Bank, IMF, and so on, have huge influence and increasing influence around the lives of ordinary people across the world, those institutions are stuck in the geopolitics of 1945, when those institutions were actually formed. I think just to look at the transition again here, I mean, one of the terms I think people were quite, familiar with was when people jokingly started saying, when so many people were going from the NGO community into government, the term NGO no more stands for non-governmental organization, but next government official. I think people who know the NGO, people are saying it's now next government official. But interestingly, I think the moment where we are now is worth reflecting on. There's a macro, meso, and a micro level at which what I call NGOs engage in public life. And what I mean by that, by macro I mean governance, by meso I mean policy, and by micro I mean delivery. Okay, today if we look in our country and abroad, about 80% roughly, non-scientific guesstimates, of what are the outputs of non-governmental organizations is still at the delivery level. The bottom line is delivery capacity on the one end, when measured in terms of the amount of need, in terms of just the provision of program services and so on, there's a far too big gap between them. So unless within the NGO community, we recognize for ourselves that in fact part of our mission has to be to capture the knowledge that our delivery work at the micro level gives us, and quite often it's unique. What we need to be saying to governments, our own and others, is that why do you want to deprive yourself of a reservoir of free policy intelligence that is to be found in organizations such as Planact and others? NGOs step up and say, well, based on 20 years of delivery work, these are the 10 key policy lessons that we've learned, and we want to engage with government at the local, provincial, national level to actually bring those lessons to be embraced in policy making. That's when you see anxiety at a whole range of levels in many, many countries around the world. I think we have to be thinking very carefully about how South Africa plays its role on this continent and what role we have as citizens. The issue of accountability is one that it's an ethical imperative. With increasing influence, with greater command of public resources and so on, also must come the greater burden of public accountability. And I think I'll just leave that there. The second internal challenge is the politics of engagement. And I think, when I look at it globally, there are three sort of strands of thought and practice. There are those that take a principal non-engagement position, say with regard to the World Bank and IMF, where they say these institutions are flawed, they're part of the problem, and on principle we will not have any engagement with them. That's one view. On the other extreme, you have those who have a comprehensive engagement approach where it doesn't necessarily mean they agree with what the bank or other institutions, whether at the local government or provincial government level, but they say, well, that's a reality. These institutions might be flawed, but if we want to advance our particular issues, we need to develop ways of engaging with them. And then in the middle, you have those that adopt what you might call a selective engagement. One of the challenges for this conference as you look forward, I think, is also how does, and I think the contribution Planact can make not to yourselves only, but to the community as a whole, how do we actually think about the question of engagement? Then lastly, just to conclude on 2 points about resourcing. I mean, I think, firstly, it's just fantastic that Planact is still here, 20 years. I mean, just the fact that it exists is an achievement in itself. I mean, I think you need to, because I have seen, sadly, so many good NGOs who still had good things to do for society that have collapsed. This exercise of capturing memory is a political exercise, it's an important exercise, and hopefully it will inform the next 20 years of Planact's and many other NGOs' work in South Africa. Thank you very much.
I'd like to introduce Lauren Royston, who will share with us the Planact way, remembering 20 years of Planact in action.
What I want to do with my presentation is contribute to that memory capture, which we heard about earlier. But I also want to, secondly, I want to offer some reflections on this idea of the Planact way. So Planact starts in 1985. In the era that we called resistance, there was transition happening already, of course, but I think it does make sense to refer to that as resistance. Precisely how Planact begins, a meeting in this building, as Alan suggested, a meeting in the offices of a certain architect in Rocky Street, in Langa. This is Planact in the struggle years. And Planact calls, at this time, Planact calls the organizations with which it works user groups. It refers to itself as a service organization, and it's in service to a mass base. It works on request, and accountability to that base is very important. In the transition period, which begins circa 1990, again, it's quite hard to be very definitive about that. There are important things that give meaning to this period. There's the Soweto Accord. By 1990, Planact is supporting civics in negotiations in many places around the country and in the PWV. This continues over the next 5 years until the first democratic elections in the immediate aftermath, hence 1995. In this period, Planact refers to the people it works with as clients, no longer user groups, and somewhere along the line, Planact begins to refer to itself as an NGO, no longer a service organization. What happens with Planact in 1996 is it survives a funding crisis. It survives. And it begins to work for the democratic state. At first, it feels like it's working with it. This type of engagement does begin to change. There's also community development in this period. Planact refers to partners now, and partner organizations, no longer the language of the client. By 2000, local government is consolidating with legislation, systems, structures, policy instruments. And in this period, community protests also begin. Participation is institutionalized. Planact's work with councillors continues. Planact's engagement with ward committees begins. And in 2005, Planact is 20 years old. And Planact, at 20, decides to look back, document its history, give space for celebration, as well as interrogation, hanging interrogation on this notion of the Planact way. Founding in 1985. This is the period of the typewriters. These are Planact's principles in 1985. I won't read them, they're up there for you to read. Then there's growth, which I pegged quite arbitrarily in 1989. It could have been 1990 or 1991. This is an image of part, and only part of a list of Planact's projects in that period. The project list is enormously long. I wanted to convey that and a sense of some of the projects in that image. Formalization in 1992. The organograms, they get more complex. 1996, there's survival. This is a survival plan for Planact. It's a brave document that talks about the 1996-97 strategy and the new Planact. And it's a public communication about what's happened to Planact. And then there's working for the democratic state. There are handbooks and manuals. What Planact does, this is an early statement of what Planact does. So I'm talking to the work. It focuses on housing and urban development, broadly speaking. But local government is never very absent, even though it may not be very explicit in the early statements that one can find about Planact. And that quickly begins to take a central stage. Planact's about making cities and towns work for people. It's local development, that's important. An integrated framework, that's expression here. And local government transformation and community development. In the early days, the Planact statements were about accepting demand requests, this request basis. The context has changed greatly since then, and I think it's necessary to in looking backwards, I think it's necessary to understand where that demand for Planact services has come from. The second thing is about resourcing, and it's about opportunities, but certainly currently it's mainly about constraints. And here what's particularly important is the donor context, and how the donor context has changed over time, and Planact's response to that, and now Planact's income generation ability. And not just now, but over the last 10 years. So there's community development, and there's governance. But I think that it's not appropriate or accurate to reflect those as unrelated to each other. So I think that governance is better reflected in some relationship to community development. And it's interesting to notice that at times there's been remarkable tension between those two areas of work. And the community development work has changed. Initially it was with civics and unions, then mainly with civics, then CDFs, and then localized CBOs, what Planact in the literature refers to as localized CBOs, and board committees, and then more frequently with community leadership. Planact's influence has been an intellectual influence, an influence on the development discourse, and in that I see a few key themes. One city, one tax base is another theme or imprint that comes to mind. Developmental local government. So these are not all necessarily products of Planact, but they're the imprint of Planactors. How we understand community. In remembering, what strikes me is an opportunity to remember, as in membership. So remember and remember. This is about Planactors as a community, as diaspora, as a network. This idea needs shaping. But as we go into the rest of this event, we will be remembering. And I want to leave you, many of you Planactors, with the notion of also remembering Planact.
I've been trying to look at the history post-1994 and really struggled to make sense of it. And part of the problem is that in writing or rewriting history, the issue that in searching for documents and trying to look at what people have put down on paper, there's very little. I mean, in trying to find what was the Clubfoot Charter, one of the first meetings that led to the idea of the formation of the Urban Sector Network was that there was a meeting in Grahamstown. One of the few things published to try and capture this was an article by Mark Swilling in a publication with a rather unfortunate, with the publisher having the rather unfortunate acronym of NAI, in which he talks about conversations as a revolution. The debates, and I think it's very important for us to understand what the debates are. Because the 20 years that we've been through were probably 20 years of the most major changes, not only in South African terms, but internationally. So we then started moving. We had perestroika, we had glasnost, and we started moving from seeing the state as the provider of everything to the state being a major role player, to the state being a facilitator. And that was reflected in the negotiations, it was reflected in our way of looking to the future, because we were entering into a period where a lot of us were working for what was a government in waiting. The state carved out a particular niche for itself and said the Reconstruction and Development Program is very important. And I remember that there were two meetings almost in the same week. The one meeting that looked at the formation of Sangoko, and within that week was this massive conference in Cape Town on the Reconstruction and Development Program. If one looks carefully at the Reconstruction and Development Program, despite the developmental language used in it, it was actually a set of targets. And that is very interesting because the way that the USNA organizations worked was we shall be involved in social housing. We shall be involved in people's participatory processes. Development shall be people-driven. And those are all very slow processes. And you have a new government dealing with huge backlogs, and he's saying, hang on, that's not the capacity we want. The capacity we want is to mobilize the delivery capacity of the private sector, is to use the massive state infrastructure, parastatal organizations to deliver for us.
Are there some questions?
Question for Monty. In light of earlier presentations, I wondered if you had a view on the closure of the USN and the closure of some of the members of the USN, whether he came to any thoughts on that in his report.
I really can't answer that outside of saying that the organizations that have survived and that have been successful organizations that have remained relatively small and were able to cope with the changes and also to cut back on their budgets. Some of the organizations that went under had CEOs earning just incredible salaries. I don't know if that's the reason why you asked the question.
One more question.
Just to follow up on that, Laura, if you had some thoughts about what re-membership might look like.
I have loads of thoughts about that, but I think that that's an issue for this event. That's why I closed to the end. I don't think, and I'm happy to talk perhaps more informally about what that might be, but I think that would be something of a strategy which might come out of this 2 days. I think that's what needs to come out of the 2 days, because I don't think it was ever about simply looking backwards, it was looking backwards to look forward. And for me, the critical thing is who owns that?
The remarks made by Monty has reinforced some of the things that I'm going to say. It might be a useful idea to explore with them, people who have worked inside the state, to try and hear what is going on in that beast. What makes it tick or not tick? And that's what I partly was referring to when I was saying we need to evaluate our strategies and tactics if our intention is to do what Kumi was saying. At what level of the system do we want to make the biggest impact?
Welcome you to this afternoon's session. We're on a slightly tight time frame after the photo interlude, and I think everybody was enjoying lunch quite a lot. But before we start the panel, we would just like to give Mr. Klaus Teschner, who's one of our donors, who's made this whole conference possible. We'd like to give him an opportunity to address us first.
Okay. Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are all cold, and I will try to be not so long. If somebody should make a comment to the 20 years of Planact in behalf of Iserio agency from Germany, it should not be myself representing Iserio, it should be my colleague Gregor Merkel, who did this job all the time long, and who actually sends you his greetings and tells us he regrets a lot not to be able to be with us at this moment. Looking back, and well, this is a sort of informal impact assessment, as we talked about. Now looking back, some relevant things have been achieved all these years, but some aspects of reality did not change very much. So we could be tempted to think more that the change, more that things that remains the same thing, as a French novelist pointed out. In this, this informal assessment, 3 points come to my mind. First, we have all these housing projects. We heard about 1 million, and this is really a big figure. And just talking about figure, this is really an achievement. And well, we have right of housing in the Constitution. Government is concerned. There's a priority to reduce the big housing deficit. But with all that, and with all these efforts, we still have millions of families, and we can see them living in shacks. We have millions of people that are bed housed and homeless people. So we wish you a clear mind to identify the new challenges and much energy and support to face them. I hope this conference might be a first step in that direction. Thank you for your attention.
This afternoon, the theme is democratization in local government. We're going to start off with a paper put together by Rashid Sida, Pascal Malloy, and Roland Hunter, Planact One City Approach and Experience of Local Government in Johannesburg.
First is that we're about 12 years on, and if you look 12 years back, and over the passage of time, some of the ideas have moved a bit. We have grown older and we've grown better. We suspect that Planact today, and gathering from the inputs this morning, has to be positioning itself, whether they go into constructive engagement or the other, but they are not necessarily, I think, a body established or which harbors the intentions of overthrowing the state. And thirdly, the city of Johannesburg itself has gone through a lot of changes, and we don't want to pretend that there was a planned way or there was a set way of trying to present the city of Johannesburg as a one continuous, homogeneous entity. It has gone through a number of changes, and those changes, I think, can be, in the last 10 years or 12 years, also be attributed to the different forms that the city took, the different dynamics, the politics throughout the entire transitional phase, from the pre-interim, the interim, the pre-interim, the interim, and the final stage that we found ourselves with the unicity of Johannesburg. And lastly, it suggests that there was Planact way that was a transformation agenda, and that there was a line somewhere. And that we want to lift Soweto a bit and look at Soweto like any other township. It could be Alex, it could be Danzani, it could be Langa, it could be any other. But if we are going to be making certain verdicts about whether or not the last 10 years has worked, and therefore the Planact way has had some influence, we thought that we could use Soweto as a measure.